Hi there once again, and welcome to part 2 in this series on using strings. In our first tutorial we learnt that we could type the words Xpresso mechanic onto the screen from left to right, and then we could make them scroll off to the left. What we're going to do in this tutorial is make them build on from left to right, and then once they're there, instead of making them scroll off, we're going to make them type off from right to left, the direct opposite of what we've just done. So from the right, starting with the C, that will disappear, then the I, then the N, etc. And it will literally type the word off from right to left. We are also going to make the timeline adjust its length automatically in order for it to accommodate a string of any size and create the perfect loop point. So that's what we're going to do in this particular tutorial. Okay, let's just get our Xpresso editor back. Right, so how are we going to do this? Well, if we come to System Presets and we go to Strings, in here we have left string. Now left string is what we're going to be using in order to make this happen. So I'm just going to bring that in and place it above my mid string there for now. What I'm also going to do is just move this Python node over here and just move this over so that we can use that in a minute. Now, first thing I'm going to do is plumb in my string into the left string. And as I mentioned in the previous tutorial, you can also, if you wish, let me just move that over there, you can, if you wish, plumb this in to the input string and you'll get the same result. But I just think it's tidier just to go from the Python node there and plumb that in. Okay, so that's why I've added the string output port on the Python node. Okay, so moving on from here, the first thing I need to bring in is a math multiply. So let's get one of those. We'll change the function to multiply. And I'm going to get the count value of my string here, or of the string here from the Python node, and I'm going to place that in the top. And I'm going to multiply that by 5. Now you'll see what I'm going to do in a minute. I'm just going to leave that there for the mo. Next thing I need to do is compare, getting another compare. And I'm going to compare my frame value to the value that's coming out of the multiply. And once these two are equal, what it means is that once the frames effectively reach the same length as the count value, or the same value as the count value times 5, whatever that may be, and it's 18 times 5 at the moment, so 18 times 5 is what? 90. So once the frame value is 90, then this compare is going to output a true value, so it's going to give me a 1 at the output here. Now that's useful to me because I can use that a little bit later, and what we're going to do is get a bool, and we're going to bool these two results. So what I'm going to do here is plumb the first compare into the top of the bool and the second in the bottom. Now this first compare is equal to 0. So this was the frame. What we were doing here was comparing the frames to 0 and using that simply to reset the monoflop. We can still do that, that's fine. And we can use it in the bool as well because it will still be useful to us here. What we've got here though in the bottom, so once I've got my frame value equal to my count times 5, this will also be true at that point. That will only, this compare is only going to output 1 when our frames are at 0, but this is going to also output 1 once our frames times 5, or our count value times 5 is equal to our frames. Now that's important because we're going to use this to trigger a flip-flop. So once this bool is giving us what we want, it will trigger a flip-flop, and the way we're going to do that is change the function here to OR, because it doesn't want to be both of these at the same time. I just want either of them to trigger the flip-flop. So let's bring in a flip-flop, place that in here, and all I need is to plumb the output of the bool into the switch. Okay, so that's good. And then moving on from here, I just want to move all of these out of the way. I need to bring in a condition. Place this here. And I'm going to put the switch at the bottom. Makes life a little bit easier to see what's going on. and I'm going to plumb the output of my flip-flop into that switch. The first input here I'm going to leave as a 0. I'm not going to do anything with that one, but all I'm going to then plug in to the top input switch here is the output of what we've got going on here. Okay, so initially we're going to be using the first input here. When the flip-flop is outputting a 0, it's going to be using this one. Okay, so that's all good, and that's all going to work fine. When the flip-flop is triggered, we're going to start using what's coming out of here. Okay, so that's important. So if we just get a math subtract, that's the next thing we need, because this is the point at which we need to start subtracting from our string. We just put that there and bring in a subtract. We can then subtract the output of the condition from our count value. And then that can be plumbed into the count value of our left string. Just put that at the top just to tidy things up a bit. And I'll move a few of these around just to make it a little bit tidier. Just move these over a little bit. It's quite a long old expression, this one actually. It's quite a bit to this one. Okay. And that's the basic setup. Now another thing I'm also going to do is bring in another math add, and I'm going to put it up here. And I'm just going to put 1 in the bottom. And I'm also going to bring my count value into the input at the top there, and then take this into the input at the top of the subtract. So I'm just going to add 1 to my count value, and then we're going to subtract what's going on here, the actual counter value from the monoflop, from our count value of the left string, and that's going to make this happen. I've added this 1 because it just makes it a little bit, it actually makes the text stay on the screen for an extra 5 frames, and it just makes it a little bit smoother. It makes the animation look a little bit less abrupt, and that's why I've done that. So let's just see if I've made any mistakes. Let's just see if it's working the way it should be. So that counts on nicely. Does it do what I think it should? Not at the moment, it doesn't, does it? So the reason it doesn't is because we need to add some more bits and pieces into this Python node. We've got to enhance it, and we've got to make it a little bit more, a little bit cleverer really, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually use it to adjust the length of the timeline here in frames according to the length of the actual string. That's what we're going to do here. Okay. Now there's a bit of a shout out I've got to give here, and it goes to the people at CG Society. And what I've got, if I go down to here, right, this code here, which was created by Jed 1949, so the shout out's going to you, Jed 1949. This code here I've taken and I've adapted it slightly, and this is the code that we're going to be using to control the length of our timeline. Okay, so it was something I did a bit of research on, and this is what I found, so that's great. So thanks very much for that, Jed 1949. Okay, let's get back to Cinema 4D. Right, so what we need to do then is go into our code over here. Again, I'm going to do it in the editor over here. We'll work in there. Now I need to add another variable, so I need to say frame is equal to doc.getTime .getFrame doc.getFPS. You've seen me do that one before. It's a bit of a long-winded one, as I always say, but that's the first thing we need to do. That gets us our frames from the timeline. Okay. Moving on from there, I need to simply come down here and say if frame is equal to 0. And this is where the bulk of our code is going to go. So we're going to do the bulk of this code at the beginning of the timeline to set things up. So the first variable I need to define is f, which is a float. So I can say f is equal to float count multiplied by 10, and I'm going to add 20. I'll explain what I'm going to do with this a little bit later. You'll see it when things are set up. Next variable I need is time, and this is going to be equal to f divided by doc get fps. So we're simply going to divide our floating point value here by the frames per second. That's what we're doing there. We're then going to say pt is equal to doc, and this is where the bulk of our code that we've just seen at CG Society comes in. So this is going to be c4d dot doc document, I should say, document underscore time. That's the first variable we need there. We can then say pt plus equals, and it's c4d dot base time brackets time. And then moving on from here, we simply need to say doc square brackets c4d dot document underscore max time. Is equal to pt. And this allows us, so pt is allowing us to set our maximum time down here to whatever we want it to be based upon our float value and times per second time and all the rest of it. That's basically, it's just a formula that we're using to set the actual maximum time. And then finally we just need doc c4d document loop max time is also equal to pt. So the loop point at the end is going to be equal to, well, it's the same, isn't it? It's maximum time. So that's what we've got there. And that's pretty much it. What I need to do, I just need to just take these two out of here, put them after. I'm just going to put those two after this. And that essentially is all we need to do. So all things being fair, if I press the execute button, you saw that the timeline has now changed. It's updated. So we've now got 190 frames in there, whereas before we had 150. So let's now see if anything is actually happening that we want to happen now. And it's still not quite doing what we want it to do, so there's something else I need to do. Let's have a look. So I've got my multiply in there. I've got my compare, which I'm comparing my frames to my length there. What have I got here? Yeah, everything is okay there. My mod's okay. The bool is set to OR, which is what it needs to be. Flip-flop is set. So what have I got there? I've got condition that's set there. The bottom one is 0. I've got a math subtract, and I've got that from the count value. Oh yes, of course, the last thing I need to do is add another condition, because otherwise we're not selecting between the two of these, so that's fine. Yeah, I think everything is actually working properly. I just need to get this last condition in there just to make everything hang together. Right, so I'll copy this one over here, and then I just need to use the output of my flip-flop to change the switch on this particular condition there so that it switches at the right point. And then all I need to do is put my left string in the top one, or the top input there, and my mid string in the middle input there, and everything should work if we just plumb that into the text. Right, let's see what happens. Just tidy it up a little bit. Okay, let's go back to the beginning and see what happens. What do we get in there? Getting something a bit different there, aren't we? So I've got mid string, input string, it's all there. I think I know why. We didn't change it to string, so we just need to put string in there, and that should work fine. And it does. There you go, Xpresso mechanics on there now. Right, so let's just go back to the beginning and see what we get. Okay, counting on nicely. And counting off nicely. So our flip-flop's working, it's doing the correct thing. And it loops and it works perfectly fine. Yeah, so all working very, very nicely now. Okay, let's just see what happens when we change the string in our constant here from Xpresso Mechanics. We'll do something smaller. Let's just type Python in there. So we've got a smaller word. Instantly the timeline updates, so we've only got 80 frames now. And we play that on, we get Python. Perfectly good. And it doesn't care how long your string is, so if I say, I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial, and I hit return, straight away we get 390 frames now. And if we play this, on it'll go. And it'll count back off, and at the appropriate time it will loop. So it all works perfectly well, and it goes to show you just how powerful Python can be. You know, it's quite a useful thing to be able to do a little bit of Python with this stuff. And there you go, well, off it goes again. To finish off, I said I'd explain what I've done with this float value. So it's count times 10, so whatever the count of the string is, just multiplied by 10. The reason it's multiplied by 10 is because I said every 5 frames we're going to put a letter on the screen. So I needed to double it because I needed double the amount of time in the timeline in order to allow us to have the time to count the letters off again. So that's why I've times it by 10. If I times it by 5, it will just count them on, and then it will loop, and there just won't be time to count them back off. But I've also added another 20 frames on the end because it just takes away the abruptness. If you don't put the 20 on, it might be a little bit abrupt. If we just took that off and then execute that, let's just see what it does to it. I don't think it looks as good. That's my personal feeling anyway. But let's see what happens. Because we've only got 170 frames now, as you can see. It's updated from 190. So it counts them off. And then instantly they come back. And that pause, I think it just makes the animation look a bit... just makes it look better. You know, I suppose it depends what you're doing with the thing, really. It probably might not matter if you're not going to bother looping it. It doesn't matter at all, does it? But for the purposes of this tutorial, I just felt that it looked better. Okay. I mean, you might find at times it has a bit of a mare doing this, and it starts to scroll things off. If it does that, if it leaves anything on the screen, as long as the screen's blank, it will work properly. But if you've got the words sort of... you've stopped it and the words are sort of half on, and then you kind of carry it on like this. If, for example, if we go through now, what you'll find is it perhaps might have a bit of a mare when it gets, you see, it starts to scroll off. We don't want that. So what you need to do is set things back to 0. Having set it back to 0 now, it's still on the screen. What I need to do is play and then go back to 0, and it's reset itself then, and everything is fine now. It won't have that nightmare of not quite working correctly. So yeah, it's absolutely fine again now. So just bear that in mind. But anyway, there it is. That's the setup for it. It is quite involved once you start adding the other bits and pieces to it, I suppose. But it's the important thing is that we just need to make this flip-flop work at the correct time. So you need that little bit of a formula with multiplying the count by 5, whatever it may be, and then using that value, comparing that value to the actual frames there. And once the two match, you've got to trigger the flip-flop at that point using the ball here. We just trigger the flip-flop, and that switches the condition between using the left string and the mid string, and then just subtracting from the left string in order to make the letters count off from the right hand side. That's all we're really doing. And then of course you change the condition here at the same time so that we either use the left string or the mid string. And that's it really. It is that simple. And this little bit of padding there is just to make the what happens is once the Xpresso mechanic here is counted on fully, there'll be a little bit of a pause there before it starts to count off again. Otherwise, again, it looks quite abrupt, as it did when we took away the plus 20. So that's why that's in there. It's just a little bit of mathematical padding in order to stop the abruptness of this being counted off. I mean, you can add a little bit more if you want and leave it on there a little bit longer. But, it's entirely up to you. It's just whatever your personal taste is, really. But anyway, that's the conclusion of the tutorial. That brings us to an end. So hopefully you enjoyed this one and you've learnt a little bit more about strings. I mean, what you could do is have a go with right string. I mean, you've got a right string in the system presets there. Bring the right string in and see if you can have a play about with that one and see what that does. It will work in a similar way to what we've got here, actually. Obviously, it does the direct opposite of what left string does, so it should allow you to count things on the way we've done with the mid string. It's just that you won't get the scrolling effect. It doesn't do that. That's the difference. Right string should allow you to count the letters on exactly the same way as we're doing there. It's just that you won't get that scrolling effect incorporated into it. But anyway, that brings us to the end of the tutorial. So all that remains to be said is I'll see you very soon on the next one.